Excellent. That's the record going ahead as well. So yes, good morning, everyone. Good to see that a lot of participants have already got stuck into Module 1 quiz and certainly getting some very positive feedback and positive results going through there. So not sure if we've made this quiz a little bit too easy, because see if we're getting lots of 9s and 10s out of there. Apparently the Wally question stumped a few people. I may have made that a little bit too challenging without any tolerance there. So if you got that Wally question wrong, you can still pass this course with your certificate, so don't worry about that. But there's no Wally in today's presentation, so if you are trying to look out for our friend Wally the Wombat, he's not in today's slides, and that's because we don't actually have a quiz at the end of today's module. We have another type of assignment or assessment, which I will run through at the end of today's session, just so you're aware of what is required. But just to reiterate, no Wally today, so don't need to be looking out for him. Thanks for everyone as well for jotting down a few notes in the introduction. Because this is obviously not a face-to-face style training session, that introduction is really a way that you can connect with other people and just tell us a little bit about yourself, because we don't actually have, the traditional opportunity to just wander over and have a chat to someone on another table. So it's a good opportunity just to say hi to everyone else in this training course and why you think or why you joined and what you hope to get out of it and things like that. Also just interested to hear the level of cycle experience that you do have. If you are a commuter cyclist, or you haven't ridden in 20 years because you're too scared to go on the road, or whatever experience you have, it's nice to know that. So feel free to continue adding to that introduction on Moodle. Today's module is focused on on-road cycling facilities, and there's a lot of content to cover in today's session. So there's certainly lots of examples of the good, bad, and ugly that we can go through, and hopefully focusing more on what would be considered best practice, and hopefully get that ingrained in everyone's minds going forward, and trying to point out those examples that are just not working for cycling safety, and you're better off going back to the drawing board rather than implementing these types of infrastructure, which we'll hop into later. Before I get stuck into the presentation though, I'd be interested to hear if anyone managed to review the 360-degree footage. And we had 2 examples in that video. You may note that Ken and I have obviously had no formal acting training. It was very much an improvised script, but we tried to get the main messages out there. There was 2 examples that we showed of a shared path crossing a road, and those examples ran twice, so you could focus on different things each time those videos went through. I've got little snips there of example 1 and example 2. And Emma, if it's possible, could we launch the poll? Because the question that I'm interested in, for those who have already watched the video, which example do you think is the one that demonstrates best practice for a shared path crossing a road?
Oh, we've got a few comments about the footage actually, Rax, as well. So, sorry, RJ Smith is your username. I can't see that right now. So got a bit motion sickness. Max, you can relate to that. That happened to you as well.
That did happen to me, yes. I didn't find the goggles were working for my line of sight too well, and it kind of messed with my head. And one of the issues you may be having is the convex mirrors may be around the wrong way. Yeah. Or just some people are a little bit more sensitive, just like some people get seasick and other people don't. So I happen to fall into the category that it makes me a little bit motion sick, and that's why I prefer to just watch it on my desktop PC and just scroll around.
Okay, and I'll launch the poll. People are actually answering in the chat. Love everyone's enthusiasm. So let's launch this poll. So which example shows best practice design for shared path crossing a road?
We were very lucky with the filming as well. We had nice blue skies and just a lovely day to be out there cycling and capturing this footage, which always adds to the environment.
got 100% completed very quickly, Max. So I'll end the poll. Here we go. And I'll share the results with everyone. There we go.
So what was the general verdict there, Emma?
100%
Ah,
of participants said example 1.
wow,
So
sensational. And for those that, everyone that's responded to that, what's not so good about example 2? What could be improved about example 2? Happy to jot down any comments in the chat, and Emma can read those ones out.
While they do that, Nigel's just popped in. Couldn't show the video on landscape on his phone. Is that, Max, do you know, because you need to do it through the app?
It shouldn't be the YouTube app.
Yeah.
I suppose mine's or my phone automatically has the YouTube app, so it defaults to opening with that. So perhaps, Nigel, if you haven't got the YouTube app, maybe give that a download from whichever provider you have, the Apple Store or
says his phone.
Microsoft Store. Yeah, that's a little bit of a shame. I'm not sure why that would have happened. Any comments, Emma, on example 2?
So there's I'm not sure. I guess it's disjointed is not. I'm not sure if that's about the footage or about the crossing. There's a speed hump at the crossing. No bike priority. It's another response. Road line markings could be added to sample 2.
Mm-hmm.
Example 2, speed hump could have been located closer to the intersection as a raised crossing for the path priority isn't clear. Example 1, raised. Example 2 requires cyclists to look back to check for oncoming traffic, and cyclist has to give way. It's not obvious to the driver that the priority is for the shared path. It's all the same level, I think. For example, 2, slight distance, look back over shoulder, priority to turning vehicles. Confusing signage is another one. Lots of responses. This is fantastic.
I was about to say, certainly picked up on a range of issues today, which is good.
Yeah.
Everyone's got their critical eye functioning and ready to go this morning, which is excellent.
Absolutely.
So a few points that I'll just expand on there, which I think seems to be the common thread there. But example 1 is an example of the shared path continuing straight through. So the priority is for the cyclists and pedestrians travelling through there, and vehicle traffic needs to give way to anyone that's already crossing there. Whereas example 2 is a little bit more dicey, a bit more confusing as to who gives way to who. The fact that the shared path sign end is right there at the threshold is even more confusing, because it's communicating to cyclists that, hang on, you really don't have right of way crossing here. So you need to stop, slow your journey, look left and right, and then cross, which for those that have, experienced these things cycling, it's not as easy to do, just stopping and pausing all these different little minor legs along your route. And it's very common just to slow down a little bit, but kind of just hope for the best and cross as you want. So yes, although example 2 does have that raised speed hump prior to the crossing point, probably would have been more advantageous to bring that to the threshold, or providing that continuous path across for the shared path users. And another thing in the video that is a lot clearer is just the facility itself. For example 2, you'd be forgiven if you thought we were not actually riding on a shared path. It looks just like a footpath, which has, a bike symbol on it somewhere. So it's not in good condition. There's cracks in the pavement, and there's vegetation that's overhanging and stuff like that. So it's not really communicates to cyclists this is a a nice spot to ride. So that's also something that's not quite to do with the road crossing, but just as a general note, it's not the best shared path that you could experience. Okay, so that's just a quick review of the 360 footage. I also just made a note in the previous module just regarding this little slow point treatment that I mentioned is in Perth, and I said I'd just follow that up with like a photo of what that looks like in busier times. Apologies for the resolution of the photo. I thought I had a better snap of this, but you can see the pedestrians there crossing in that particular zone to access the train station. It's City West train station for those that are familiar with Perth. And because there's such a congregation there of people, they decided to put this treatment in to slow cyclists down. However, the suggestion from Tuesday to raise that pedestrian crossing point instead, I'm still all for that. I think that would have been a much better solution, but this is just an example of what could be implemented.
Max, the questions come in around road rules. Don't the road rules require cars to give way, like in example 2?
Yes, so my understanding is that a vehicle that is turning into the minor leg has to give way to all pedestrians or cyclists that are crossing that facility. So those that are turning into the minor leg. However, if you're leaving the minor leg and going into the major road, you're given the priority. And that's my understanding. Ken, is that true? I probably should have checked in with you first, or?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a confusion in the road rules where if you're on one side of the carriageway, you kind of get the priority, but on the other side, the vehicles traveling get the priority. So there's not a clear indication of what the road rules there are really stating. And I think generally both motor vehicles and the general population wouldn't even understand that road rule either. So to me, it really communicates in that example too, that you as the cyclist are forced to slow down and give way to both streams of traffic there, entering and exiting general traffic. Good question though. Today's session agenda is all about on-road cycling facilities, as I mentioned at the start. So things we'll be looking at is protected bicycle lanes, which is considered best practice in this space. We'll look at one-way paths as well as two-way paths, sometimes referred to as bidirectional bike lanes. And we'll look at a range of different separators that can be used to facilitate these protected bicycle lanes, because it's often thought that all you can do is provide, those Copenhagen lanes with physical concrete median strips, which are, an expensive alternative, but there are other options out there which can provide this, which we'll jump into later. We'll look at on-road bicycle lanes as well and discuss the risks of the obvious one being dooring, and look at some other treatments that are available there to reduce that risk of dooring. So the double chevron as well as single chevron pavement markings, providing an exclusive bike lane and a wide curbside bike lane, which although is installed somewhat regularly on arterials, it's something that we would like to see less of, really. And finally, the last kind of chapter in today's course, we'll be discussing mixing the traffic. So in other words, cycling, mixing with general traffic in the traffic lane, and exactly the best way to, or when that would be deemed appropriate to do, and how to facilitate that through sharrows and local area traffic management treatments. So the protected bicycle lane, here we have a lovely one in Collingwood in Melbourne, and this is a one-way bicycle lane, and it's actually wide enough to allow cyclists to travel two abreast, which is really, really fantastic, because some cyclists riding these facilities may not be the most confident, or just maybe taking leisurely strolls, whereas other cyclists may be actually commuting and trying to get from A to B, or trying to get to work or a meeting on time, so they might be going at fastest pace. And this wide bicycle lane allows for that kind of overtaking maneuvers. So you're not constrained in a small, narrow environment where a cyclist is kind of stuck behind a slower cyclist, there is opportunity to overtake or to have a conversation with your friend and ride two abreast, which is just a really, really good example of how these facilities can be built. The protected bicycle lane, if we're talking at a strategic sense, connecting points A to B and providing safety and connectivity for cyclists who feel confident, they feel safe, and they feel like they have been given, a passage away from mixing with vehicles, then the protected lane is exactly what needs to be provided. This provides a level of safety, both, as from the perspective of the cyclist, how you feel, and as the statistics actually show, the number of crashes occurring with cyclists and vehicles in a protected lane is far reduced as opposed to painted lane. So this statistic here is an 83% of the cycling population feel confident to ride in a protected lane, as opposed to 22% confident to ride. So you can see that the benefits are quite clear. The protected lane is all about shifting all of your general traffic away from your cycling traffic. Typically, the cycling traffic is on the curbside next to the footpath, and then there's some type of safety strip or just a physical barrier that protects the bicycle traffic from either the parked vehicle lane or the live traffic lane. So that's at a high level what the protected lanes are, and the importance of them are very clear. If you're trying to promote cycling, encourage cycling from ages 8 to 80, it's a common rhetoric that I'll continue to use, then the protected lanes are really the way that we need to go about it, because if you're only doing painted lanes and you're only catering for 22% of people that feel confident to ride that, you're really not getting the majority of benefits that the whole community can enjoy. You're really targeting a specific type of person, a confident cyclist, as opposed to just the general cycling population. Any questions, Emma?
We've got a comment from a couple of the Corey's just said it'd be great if the concrete strips could be used to start. Sorry, I'll start that again. Be great where concrete strips are used to start to advocate for more circular economy focused approaches, such as recycled plastic versions. They could, and the bonus is they could be coloured. So even, and Michael suggested perhaps out of hempcrete so that it could be carbon positive. So hempcrete.
I'm all about the sustainable options. So we will actually touch on that a little bit later in this presentation. So I'm very glad that you brought that up, because that will become relevant soon. Any other questions there, Emma?
Not at this stage, no.
Excellent. Feel free to just keep jotting down any notes that anyone has. Otherwise, I'll just keep running through.
Absolutely.
So one-way paths, I've just provided this typical cross-section of how this may look. So as the name suggests, making sure that the cycling traffic are travelling in one direction, both sides of the carriageway, and enabling, so you're basically building the infrastructure on both sides of the street or the road. You'll see that there's a 1 metre, it's either called a safety strip or just like a medium buffer zone, and you'll see that's physically raised. It's not just a painted treatment or something like that. There's physical infrastructure to delineate that space. So what that means is not only is it a visual cue for motorists, that's the cyclist space, this is where I'm supposed to be, but should an errant vehicle fail to see that, or perhaps there's a medical episode and crosses over that physical obstruction, the fact that there is, some type of curbing there would actually slow a vehicle down. So if there were a collision, it would be at lower speeds. So there's also that benefit there, providing that physical separation. You are bringing vehicle speeds down should there be an event where they're crossing over onto the cycle path. So this is how a one-way path typically would look. Sometimes there's parking lanes, other times there's not. It's just adjacent to the traffic through lanes. And just a photograph of how this may look in the real world. So you notice in this example, these are typically called Copenhagen bike lanes, and they're provided with this fairly wide safety strip. Any idea why we would need these kind of wide safety strips where there are parking? So let me just get my pen out. I know that last time there was a little bit of lag in between the pen drawing and me speaking, so I'll try and delay it a little bit. But any idea why there'd be a width, approximately 1.5 meters, adjacent to the parking bays for these?
I'm getting a few responses here, Max. People saying doors prevent dooring. Yeah, people getting out of cars, car doors. Yeah.
Car dooring, spot on. So even if passengers open up the car door and fling it to their maximum extent, their ability to hit a cyclist in the cycling lane is greatly reduced because you've got this extra space. And it's also really useful for perhaps, mum and dads getting prams, getting toddlers out of cars. You've got this separated space that's elevated where you can kind of facilitate all of that movement without having to enter the bicycle lane. So it's got a two-way kind of benefit. The other side of the coin is it does provide, an additional tripping hazard for people who are crossing the road along the journey. And there's also something else to consider, that being of drainage. If you provided these separation strips in a continuous fashion, then all the water would kind of pool at these curbs, which would then have to be, either you'd have to install some new drainage lines to take that into account, or the more common way to kind of account for these things is just providing little gaps, as you can see in this picture here, and that just lets the water funnel through and go into the existing drainage lines that would be installed as part of your curb and channel. So that's what a one-way path would typically look like. For bidirectional paths, you'll see here the difference being that all the cycling traffic is located on one side of the carriageway. This would be most appropriate where you have all of the exciting things, or the things that would make you as a cyclist stop and get off your bike, located kind of on one side of the road. So if you've got, I'm not sure, say your train station is on that side of the road, and your library, all the cafes, and on this side of the road perhaps is an esplanade or a beachfront or something like that. Perhaps this is designated, the left-hand side of the screen is designated as the priority side to cater for. This is really where a bidirectional lane would be most relevant. So they're not quite as common as the one-way path that was shown before. However, they do have their uses, and there's a few little drawbacks that I will talk about providing these bidirectional paths. And I'm not trying to discount them, because they do provide still the level of separation from general traffic, which is fantastic, but there are a few little extra considerations that you need to take into account if you were looking at implementing bidirectional paths. Here's an example of a bidirectional path, and you'll see here there is no parking lane here, and so they've actually reduced this separation strip. This is about 600 mil because they're not catering for that opening of the passenger door, and not having to worry about that swinging door opening and hitting cyclists, but instead they've just got through traffic heading through there. Obviously, in an ideal world, the further that you can get general traffic away from your cycling community is better, but acknowledge that it's not always a greenfield environment. There are existing constraints, and this is a typical solution in this space, just reducing that separation strip where the risk of dooring is not there. So as I touched on earlier, just wanted to run through a few of the considerations as part of both providing a single lane or a one-way bicycle lane versus a bidirectional two-way bicycle lane. So both examples provide physical separation between vehicle, traffic and cyclists. So both of those, they get a tick. That's awesome. You're getting all your general traffic away from your cyclists and they're physically protected by some type of separation strip. So that's fantastic. The other characteristic provides physical separation between cyclists traveling in opposing directions. So what that means is a cycling going, say, northbound and a cyclist traveling southbound in a single lane, one-way operation. They're on other sides of the carriageway, so they're not going to hit each other. In a bi-directional facility, you've got them right next to each other. In other words, a cyclist can hit another cyclist because there's a potential conflict there. That could be particularly relevant if there's any curves or any narrow points along the alignments, and considering, things like wind or just the ability to maintain stability as you're cycling uphill, for instance, you may have to start wobbling. That risk of actually colliding head on with the cyclist, although it may be at low speeds, it's still something to consider if you're providing a bi-directional facility. Both examples reduce the risk of dooring compared to an on-road bicycle facility, so both of those get a tick. Maximizes the use of the carriageway width. Now you could say single lane, one way, they don't quite maximize it because you typically have to provide, if you provide two bike lanes right next to each other, it's a slightly less width as compared to one single way. So it's not much of a muchness, but it's a slight thing to consider. You can get a little bit more efficient use of your existing carriageway, providing the bi-directional bicycle lanes. Cycling facilities are present on both sides of the carriageway, enabling cyclists access to destinations on both sides of the road. So as mentioned, that's really only applicable to your single lane one way because you've got cycle facilities on both sides of the carriageway. Vehicles entering or exiting driveways or any of the accesses or side streets have a reduced number of conflict points with cyclists. That's only applicable to the one way. And I do have a diagram that will show that on my next slide, so that will make a bit more sense. Vehicles turning right to enter driveways. This is probably the most relevant, or what I consider the highest risk for bi-directional facilities. Vehicles that are traveling along and turning right into a bi-directional facility and they have to cross it, it can be very difficult to sight cyclists that are behind you. Once again, I've got a diagram to demonstrate exactly what that means, but that's probably one of the drawbacks, or one of the more significant drawbacks of providing bi-directional facilities. Once again, I'm not trying to discount bi-directional facilities. They certainly have their uses, but something to consider. And the last 2 points there just relate to pedestrians. So the first one is pedestrians will intuitively know which way to look when crossing the cycling facility. It may be a little bit confusing if you have to look both ways, crossing this small, say 3 metre wide strip. That may not be as intuitive, say just always looking to your right. And phasing can also be a little bit more complex at signalised intersection where you've got a bi-directional facility. Not impossible, just a little bit more complex. So you may have to add additional phase or green time for crossing where it's all on the one side. Here's an example of what I was talking about, where a vehicle is crossing over the bi-directional facility. And this is actually being flipped because this was an American reference. I've included the source down there at the bottom, which is included in your resources if you wanted to have a look yourself. But intuitively, the driver is obviously looking at oncoming traffic and looking at cycling traffic coming from that direction as well. It's not as kind of immediate in our responses to look both ways when crossing over a bike path. And that would be incredibly relevant in bi-directional facilities. So if you've got lots and lots of these little crossover points or driveways or accesses, you really need to be considering, how am I going to communicate to drivers that there is cycling traffic in both directions operating in this space? Because intuitively, motorists are typically looking in just the one direction. these areas. In a kind of similar fashion, this has also been adapted from Transport for London's London Cycling Design Standards. So feel free to have a look through that if you want to have a look at the original. It's obviously been doctored for this presentation. But if this vehicle here is turning right, you can see their ability to actually sight these oncoming cyclists in the bidirectional lane is fairly limited. They would have to look right across their right-hand shoulder to be able to spot cyclists that are traveling. They could be very well doing 20, 25, 30 kilometers an hour, similar to what the car is traveling at, really. So this vehicle may really just be focusing on getting a break in the traffic, getting a break in the cycling traffic, and not really paying attention to any of the other cycling traffic that are heading in their same direction. So there's another risk there for, that collision occurring, and because we've just introduced this extra conflict point where the sight lines are not fantastic. I'll open it up to the group if anyone can think of one way we could potentially manage this conflict point here in this actual example.
Sure. I've just got some other comments too coming in, Max. So bi-directional can be useful on the one-way CBD streets in Hobart and Launceston. And same can be said for vehicles turning left over either option. It's saying there and that. But isn't that what the island refuge is for as well? Some comments. And it allows turning vehicle the chance to look both ways. And so that's it could perhaps ban the right turn.
Yeah, if you banned this right turn vehicle, that would certainly get rid of that conflict point there. That's a good point. You could also consider widening this section here and raising this section, or raising exactly where look at my scribbles now, they've gone completely off the charts, but raising the section where you've got your conflict with your cyclists and creating your own storage space for the right turning vehicle to stop and give way to cyclists operating in that space. So basically they need to focus on turning right and getting the gap in the general traffic, and then they pause and wait, and then they give way to cycling traffic. So it's basically done in two movements rather than having to coordinate everything in the one breath.
Yeah.
That's just another option.
Another, in example, provide enough width for turning vehicle to have full refuge so that the vehicle comes to a stop to fully give way.
Well, that's just taken the words straight out of my mouth. Can we give that person a prize, Emma?
Absolutely, Sarah.
That's excellent. So, and that's an ideal situation where you've got the carriageway width available, and that is, if that's justifiable and you're able to do that, that's certainly a good way to manage that conflict. I'm going to hop into now the separators, because as I mentioned, when we typically talk about protected bicycle lanes, this is typically what's in people's minds, either a precast solution of a concrete strip, with some type of infill, be it asphalt or things like that. However, it's not the only product on the market, and there are other things out there that you can use to provide a physical separation between the cycle lane and general traffic. So we will hop through a couple of different examples, but just while I'm discussing these precast solutions, or just even if it is constructed in situ, a few things to think about is how you actually manage the barrier curb profile. So it's generally not preferred to do a vertical barrier curb on the bicycle lane side. And that's due to the fact that you want to be a little bit forgiving if a cyclist happens to shake a little bit and go over towards near the curb. If a cyclist were to strike a barrier curb like that with a straight vertical face, that's a hazard in itself, and that would likely result in the cyclist coming off their bike. On the other side of the spectrum, if you provide the barrier curb for the parking lane, I think that's a good alternative, and we'll come to that reason in a second. In this second image, you can see we've got the semi-mountable option there on the bicycle lane, which does get a tick because that is a little bit more forgiving. And if a cyclist were to kind of ride onto that curb, they'll likely be able to correct their movement before falling off their bicycle. On the other side of things, if you were to provide that on the parking lane side, what can actually happen is the parked vehicle can then prop up onto this infill section, or go further across and just park straight onto the bicycle lane. And you may think that's a joke, that people wouldn't do that and wouldn't dare to do that, but we recently completed a road safety audit, and we have photos of people doing exactly that. So that is crossing over, parking kind of in this fashion here. So half in the protected bicycle lane and half on top of that safety strip, purely because they can, and maybe a little bit of angst because they've got a protected bike lane there when they didn't have that before. And so they want to vent their frustration, but that does actually happen, which is pretty disappointing, but it's all part of cycling infrastructure, I guess. But let's look at what would be considered kind of best practice. So one side of the alignment, the bike lane, has got the mountable barrier, and then the parking lane has got the barrier curb profile. So if you're looking at detailed design, the best way to kind of implement this type of safety strip would be looking at this third example there, would be considered best practice.
Max, we've just got a comment that pedal strike can be an issue on a vertical curb as well.
Absolutely, yes. So depending on the height of these curbs, but certainly if your pedal is striking the top of these curbs, that can also be something that can destabilize cyclists, and another hazard that if you can avoid the use of them, then you've just removed that hazard. So
yeah, and no surprise that motorists would park on a mountable curb area. Footpaths are also parking spots here in Hobart. Are there risks?
That's exactly right. So yes, that's why it's best to not provide that provision, and then hopefully reduce that risk altogether. Another thing just to consider if you were looking at providing those wider safety strips is if you've got any disability parking bays, ensuring that all DDA requirements are met. And it's disappointing to see, but if you're not including things like curb ramps or a way for people, using these disability bays to actually access the adjacent footpath, and also providing some kind of communication that this is the crossing point, this is where we want people to access the footpath from the disabled parking bays. All of this is incredibly relevant if you are looking at doing detailed design and just making sure that you're not building, these protected safety strips all the way through there, shown in my red little drawing there. Otherwise, you've just blocked off people from accessing the footpath, which is not a good outcome. I've got a slight example of how this kind of plays out. It's not quite clear in this photo, but this is a one-way single direction bicycle lane here. And if I just zoom in on this photo here, we've got a tiny little zebra crossing, which is to access the bus stop, but you can see there's no curb ramps to access, so to go up and down. So this is really not a well thought out design because it's making pedestrians, hop down onto the bicycle lane and then hop back up onto the pedestrian footpath, or vice versa. And it's just really not catering for people who perhaps are using wheelchairs or mobility scooters or anything like that, because they've got this clear physical obstruction to continue their journey. Another really good option here would have just been to raise up this pedestrian crossing point, because then that also signalizes to cyclists, this is a pedestrian crossing point. I need to slow down. I need to give way to pedestrians crossing here. What you've got there is just a poor outcome for pedestrians. So something else to consider where you're providing protected bicycle lanes if you are doing any crossing points, making sure that there is access for pedestrians. Okay, so I'll hop into some other types of separators. Here's one that was kind of looked at before, and this is most appropriate, as I mentioned, where we are looking at providing bicycle lanes next to through traffic lanes, so not next to a parking lane. So if you don't have to worry about a door car opening, you can minimize this width of the product that you're using. So this is a bolt down precast concrete island, and it's just used in segments. Once again, you can see the gaps that have been implemented to facilitate drainage. So making sure that the water can run out into the pit, and you don't have to, design a completely new drainage line as part of just doing these bolt down works. So yeah, a few things to just remember with that, just providing those gaps to ensure that you've got adequate drainage, and also that all the sight lines are there so cyclists can see exactly the physical separation strip that's in place. And you'll also note that that has got the semi-mountable curb there as well. Any questions so far, Emma?
I've just got a few comments actually. Well, what if you are a driver with a disability, as in the previous slide? There's tram stops in there as well. Perhaps,
So
yeah. Oh,
this slide, was it?
yeah. I think, or then maybe the one before. Yes,
Probably.
perhaps. Yeah, that one.
So this is predominantly for the bus stop. So that's the bus stop kind of there. I don't think there's any parking along this section. It seems to be all off-road over here. I can follow that one up after this session though, just to confirm the extent of that question.
Yeah, no problem. Also,
Yep, sorry.
Coloured would be more effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coloured crossing seems to be becoming more and more prevalent, and whether that's a red with these white zebras, or I've seen pink out there as well, and yellow. But yes, coloured pavement seems to be more and more used.
A raised crossing there would in turn require added infrastructure, SW, Southwest infrastructure maybe?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, stormwater, sorry.
Stormwater infrastructure, yep, that's true. So yeah, if you are raising a particular crossing points, you do need to look at, do I need to provide additional pits and pipes to make sure that I'm not introducing any extra ponding areas, something else that just needs to be considered during the detailed design of these things.
Yeah, there's another.
Yeah.
I was going to say, there's another comment that stormwater grate would have to be bike safe.
Yes, that's right. So you want to make sure that the tyres for cyclists are not able to fit in your stormwater grate. Otherwise, you've just introduced a new hazard as well. I might just hop back into the different types of separators. Here's another, you could say a more streetscape, exciting option that is used. There's a couple in New Zealand. There's a couple that we've got here in Melbourne. I'm sure there's other parts of Australia that have used these as well, but using basically planting beds and other landscaping features to make this a little bit more attractive. So kind of extending the footpath almost and creating a greener space. Any consideration why I may not be promoting this in all instances? Or does everyone think we should just go straight ahead and start putting planter boxes in? Because it does provide the physical separation, so that one gets a tick, and it does clearly delineate where the cycle space is versus where your traffic stream should go, so that also gets a tick. But it's something that it doesn't gel quite too well with me, and this might just be
Someone's commented, yeah, the height of the corners may be a danger. it is hazardous, these planter boxes. It perhaps isn't mounted enough. Pedal strike as well, no space for people exiting cars. Basic things like weeding and watering and practical things.
That was actually where I was coming from, the practical nature of these things, and also the fact that plants can become overgrown very, very quickly, and then you've got leaf litter and things like that spreading into the bicycle lane. And although it may look attractive on day one, does it still look like that 12 months down the track? And has it been vandalized, or has it just become this really bushy, not quite as appealing, and almost a hazard in itself if you've got lots of vegetation spreading off into your bicycle path? So something to consider. And also, if you do require to do any pruning or anything like that, does that mean that the bicycle lane gets shut off and then cyclists have to now travel in the traffic lane? Because I don't think they'd be closing the traffic lane to do that kind of maintenance work. They'd be closing the bicycle lane as the first point of contact. So I'm not against this kind of treatment, and I think it's a nice way to improve the streetscape amenity, but I think you just got to be mindful of which products you use.
Yeah, a few people are saying it would be a bit chunky, or a bit tricky if you fell into it, and it has sharp edges and things like that. And it's hazardous is the general consensus. And someone said this would be considered a low-level fence, a pedal hazard that you mentioned yesterday.
I completely agree. That's right. And you could certainly pick that up as a hazard if you're doing something like a road safety audit, or as you're going through the design, you could certainly note that as a hazard. Yep.
And there's no continuous rail either in that principle. No, so
that's exactly right. Yes.
Perhaps some warnings or something like that. Someone else has said. So yeah. This
sounds like
hazardous.
We're all on the same page there. These little guys, they do have a specific product name, so they are a proprietary product. I'm not trying to sell them or anything like that, but they are recycled plastic, which is a big tick in my book. And yes, they're just bolted down. I'm going to open this up to the floor as well. And if anyone has any idea what this product would be called, and it's not just start guessing anything you want. It is, the title does relate to exactly what it looks like. So that's the only clue I'll give, but I'm welcoming any hilarious answers that you can think of.
That is cute. We've got a pangolin, bumblebee.
Oh, pangolin. That's a good one. A bumblebee. Nice.
Armadillo. Road slugs. These are great. Bees. No wonder the bees are dying. Lots of bees, lots of bumblebee, rumblebugs. Yeah, ladybugs. Ladybug.
Well, maybe we'll get in touch with the company that produces these, because we've got some new alternative names for them, Emma. This is good stuff. The name of them is, in fact, the armadillo. They use.
Right.
So whoever gets the armadillo, please give them a prize, Emma.
Nice.
That was fun.
No worries.
I think I'll give a prize to the pangolin as well, because I'm pretty sure that's a very similar animal. They look fairly similar, so I just also like that word. The armadillos are used pretty extensively in the US and also Spain. Obviously, you don't have the that significant physical impedance anymore, as opposed to what was first shown with the protected bicycle lanes. However, it does still delineate the space between the bicycle path and the general traffic lanes as well. So it still does use that. There is a trial that has been installed in Fremantle in Western Australia. It's a couple of years old now, but we do have I suppose precedents to install these in Australia. I've actually never cycled adjacent these things, but I think they're pretty cute, and I like the idea that they're recycled, and I think that's a genuine option. Once again, this would be appropriate where it's not next to the parking lane, so there's no swinging open doors, but if you're next to the traffic lane, this is a potential solution there for you. And recently we worked on a job, which I might share at the end of this session, for the City of Greater Geelong, where they are proposing some bi-directional and single-way lanes. And they have proposed 3 different types of protected lane treatments, one being the precast section, one being bollards, which I'll hop into next, and the third being this armadillo type as well. So I can share, they've gone out to tender with the drawings for the plans. So for those that are interested in how all these things actually look on plans, on actual designs, I can share that as a link, and you can download that, that design there for yourself and have a look exactly how these things look on paper. It's a useful resource just in case you are designing something in the future and you're not exactly sure the best way to demonstrate how this facility would look. It gives you some type of precedence. So while it's available and openly on the tender website, if you've got the inclination, feel free to download it. Other types of separators, these are very common at the moment in Melbourne. We've got this program called the Pop-Up Bike Lane program. And this is, as you can see, a plastic solution. So it's got these strips and then they've got these flexible plastic bollards. So in other words, if a vehicle or a cyclist were to collide with those vertical kind of paddles, that wouldn't be a rigid collision, that would fall back over. So it's a little bit more forgiving should a cyclist collide with them. You'll see the gaps there deliberately angled to, number one, I suppose, it's not a continuous treatment of just the cycling separation strip. It's provided so you've got less amount of these paddles to install and also angled so you're not getting the general traffic trying to weave in and use the bicycle lane there. Another example of this type of product is shown below with your flexible paddles and just a bolt down strip. And these are very, very popular at the moment in Melbourne because, as I mentioned, we've got this pop-up bike lane program, and the idea that they are being installed as a trial, and you install them for 3 months and it's not a lot of infrastructure, they're not a high cost treatment. And if the general community are absolutely up in arms and hate them, they can be pulled out at a fairly, in comparison, a low cost to other treatments that I'll show before. So they kind of have that way of getting your foot in there with the community and saying, hey, we're just giving this a trial. This is what it could look like. Give this a go. See how you go with cyclists having their own space, and if there's generally no community outlash or backlash, which invariably there is, but if you can manage that, then it can lead to more permanent solutions. So it's a good kind of stepping stone, I would consider. Other separators, so these are just flexible bollards without that little strip in the middle and just installed at regular intervals. This one is an interesting example because during peak hours, this road is throughway traffic only. Outside of peakway, you've actually got parking allowed. So this kind of negates what I was talking about before, because if you were parking in that left-hand side there, you could swing open your door and into the bike lane. So this is not a fantastic example of protected bicycle lanes. However, it's a step forward, and I think generally the community, they understand what these bollards are for, but they're hit quite often because there's not a lot that makes them stand out, and without that little separation strip at the bottom, they just look like toothpicks in the pavement kind of thing. Okay, so on-road bicycle lanes. So that's it for protected bicycle lanes. This is our favourite time of day where we ask, what's wrong with this photo? And you can see Ken there, he's mighty confused. He's got no idea what's happening. I'll just get rid of Ken just so you've got a clearer clearer look at it, but
Yeah, we've got some other questions just come in before we start this, Max, if that's okay.
mhm.
It's about, you know, all the other infrastructure, so the armadillos and things like that look like a tripping hazard for pedestrians. And do you think that we could use safety bars here? It's really being fun. Might work well if well maintained, but as we all know, things bolted to the road are only as good as how well they are maintained. If not, they become loose and become a hazard. Also, someone said, do people try to park in bike lanes?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, they do.
Natasha's just asked, what would that tender website? We can perhaps, I've made a note of that so we can get back to you after the session. And then someone's just said they prefer plastic bollards to armadillos.
There you go. Yeah.
And then someone's just asked a local question, what's going to be installed at Campbell Street in Hobart, just like the Albert Street example. There we go. And now we've got some comments about what's wrong with this photo.
Yes, let's go for it.
Dooring?
Dooring.
Yeah. Okay, dooring's not an issue in peak though, only outside the peak when cycling volumes would be lower.
Okay.
Not separated from car doors opening, nor the traffic stream. There is no line marking to separate parking space and bike lanes.
Good
No distance provided for door opening. Car door opening risk, no physical separation and too narrow for car doors and cyclists. Dooring, leaving parking space would be dangerous. There's no separation between the barriers. Yeah, pedestrians walking in the bike lane. Someone said better than nothing, but yes, there is still plenty of hazards, doors, traffic, pedestrians. These are great.
That's right. So dooring, certainly the major theme coming through, and something I would definitely agree with in this space. For those that got their magnifying glass out, you may have also noticed that there's a little skateboarder there in the bike lane, and a mum using the scooter as well, which was all part of the fun in the bike lane there, but fair enough, you didn't pick up on that one. The dooring was definitely the main risk that I wanted to talk about here, which is, as you can see illustrated in this photo, a considerable risk. A door can swing out to approximately 1.2 metres from a vehicle. So therefore, it's really important to consider that and to provide a substantial buffer to where cyclists are actually cycling. This kind of diagram is a little bit funny, but it basically just reiterates. So this was some research done of all the cycling collisions that have happened due to dooring and exactly what side of the vehicle that has occurred on. Intuitively, you would expect it to be the driver's side because there's got to be a driver driving the vehicle. So 75% occur on that side and 25% on that side. Also, considering as cyclists are typically in this position, the right-hand side of a vehicle, it makes a lot of sense that you're seeing the majority of crashes. I'd kind of expect that to be a little bit higher, but anyway, that's the kind of breakdown that this evaluation saw. The Vic Roads document, or the Department of Transport, that's they're called now, has their own technical paper called the Guidance on Treating Bicycle Door Collisions, which I've just written down there in the source. And it's got this fairly useful little matrix to suggest what may be required in different situations. I just wanted to note that, so down this side, you've got, different road uses, if it's a collector road or if it's a local street or something like that. And along here is the typical treatments that may be appropriate, where green is saying it's appropriate. According to this table, one-way protected lanes, two-way protected lanes, and off-road paths are always appropriate, which is really cool, really good to see. They're kind of encouraging for more and more of this infrastructure to be out there. They're never saying don't consider that as an option. The only time where it's something that's unlikely to be appropriate is if you've identified that there's a bicycle priority route, relocating the cyclists should not be one of the options, which I think is a pretty intuitive kind of thing to think about. You said that this is exactly where we want cyclists to be, then banning them from that particular route is not an option. So it's just a useful little table if you're considering what can be done in this space. I've got quite a few more slides to get through, so I might just have to jump through these with a little bit more rigor. But just regards to dooring, so there was this trial done in Melbourne, which, as you can see, it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's a small little green strip that's been applied to the bicycle lane, and this has been called the anti-dooring lane. And that's been deliberately offset closer to the live traffic lane. So in other words, it's trying to communicate to cyclists, cycle closer to the traffic lane rather than closer to the door to improve your safety. That was the intention of this trial. And it's still installed today. So they're still obviously happy with the results that they got from it. As a general overview of what was noted as part of the evaluation, the riders took time to adapt, but there was a lower proportion of cyclists riding within 800 mil of the parked car, so riding within that dooring zone. So they do appear to be getting shifted closer to it. It was actually a reduction of 13 to 20% prior to the installation to less than 5% after. So there is a reduction there seen. It's certainly not the answer to these situations. It's just an example I thought I'd share where they tried this as an evaluation, as a trial, sorry, and they seem to be pretty happy with how things are working, but I certainly wouldn't consider this a best practice alternative or a treatment in this space, because you've still got, even if you were cycling in that little green strip, it seems still to be within that dooring zone. So you haven't eliminated the problem, and you've just really put a little bit of paint down. Interesting to note though, 75% of cyclists said they felt more comfortable after the installation of this anti-dooring lane. So perhaps it is working in the favour of cyclists travelling along here, but I wouldn't really consider this as the go-to. Other things you could look at in this space is using double chevron. So that is this kind of pavement marking here is referred to as chevron, and using it as double. So it's protecting you a little bit from the traffic lane as well as the parked lane as well. Just provides that buffer zone on both sides. How this may actually look, the typical separation width there is between 600 mil and 1.2 meters. As I mentioned before, that 1.2 meters is taken as kind of the extent of an opening door. So if you can achieve that 1.2 meters, you're generally providing a safer cycling route. And this is just a good way to communicate to both general traffic and cyclists that this is their space and this is where they can ride between, and there's a little bit of buffer either side, but it just gives them a little bit greater safety compared to what was previously shown. A more common way, just due to restricted widths in existing carriageways, is putting the chevron either on the parking lane side or on the traffic lane side. The reason that you would kind of put it on this side of the parking lane is if you have a high turnover of traffic. So in other words, if doors are kind of regularly opening and closing, so this could be a strip shopping centre or somewhere where there's 2-hour park limits or something like that, then really the risk is more focused on that opening of the door, because that's probably occurring more often than in other environments. And so that's where the buffer has been installed. In an ideal world, you'd have the buffer on both sides or a protected facility, but given that we don't always operate in an ideal world, that's where you could look at applying the single chevron adjacent to the parking lane. There's some just figures there as well, which is similar to what was shown on the previous slide as well, using the 600 mil chevron separator. And here's the other option where you've actually got the chevron on the through traffic lane. And this would be more appropriate where you've got long-term parking. So perhaps in a residential street where the predominant parking there is people accessing their houses or things like that. So they're there all day, and opening doors would not be as frequent as in the other example. So there's not an exact science to say this many door openings requires this and that many door openings means you can put something like this. It does require a little bit of professional judgment and just discussing the risks of both options. Personally, as a cyclist, I find even if I was cycling in this environment and I knew that this was a residential zone and doors aren't opening all the time, I'm still a lot more nervous about the parked traffic than someone that's driving in the traffic lane, because someone that's driving in the traffic lane, generally they can sight the cyclist as long as there's not like massive curves or anything like that or any obstructions. But generally someone driving in the traffic lane can see a cyclist, whereas someone parked in their car may just swing open their door without even thinking about it. So I tend to promote the chevron, the parking lane side instead. But there's answers for both, really. The exclusive bike lane is installed fairly commonly on roads that are fairly high speed as well, which is not really a good outcome. I'm curious as to why this is kind of promoted and encouraged and part of our guidance. When could we not put some kind of separation strip in there that just protects cyclists a little bit better? If you're willing to say that that is exclusively a cycling space, we should be trying to protect cyclists as best we can, and understanding that they're incredibly vulnerable, particularly if they're on high speed roads. Ideally, you'd get them off the road altogether. This wide curbside bike lane, or the little ... that's just sporadically sprayed at, say, 100, 200 metre intervals. Once again, I'm not really sure this is offering any kind of safety advantage for cyclists. It communicates, within this 20 metre section, I've got a lane, but from then on, it's just a bit of a free-for-all. And we've got this really, really wide traffic lane as well. That's how it could be communicated to motorists, which could encourage, speeding and other unsafe manoeuvres. So generally not a big fan of providing these ones either. I'll shift on to mixed traffic here.
I think there's quite a few questions that have popped in there, Max.
Let's go for it.
There we are.
I'm getting too excited.
I know that we've got a lot to get through still, so I might just go back down to the questions. With the passing distance laws, why isn't outside buffer 1 metre?
Yes, that's a pretty good point. Yes, those laws have come into effect, and I suppose there's not much of an argument anymore to be providing guidance that suggests that lower chevron buffer space is approved, but that I don't think the guidelines have quite caught up with what regulation has stipulated. So that's a good point, though. Yeah. If you can provide the extra room there, please do.
Great. Does this impact any legal issues in that would give the car drivers an out?
I'm not quite sure I understand the legal issues. So...
perhaps, at least with their insurance companies is in brackets after that. So,
okay.
That is if the cyclist is potentially more at fault, if not in the green paint zone.
Oh, perhaps, I see. So if they didn't.
So there's a follow-on.
Yes, right. I don't think there was any actual regulation, certainly no road rule that stipulated that they had to use that facility. As far as I'm aware, the road rule is basically as vague as cyclists have to use whatever cycling facility is available there. I don't think that'd be quite as specific to you have to use that tiny little green strip, you have to ride there. It's probably an argument for a lawyer, and depends how good your solicitor is.
Yeah. But which is preferable to the 83%?
Which is preferable to the 83%? Oh, yeah, good question. Which chevron would be? I would say neither is preferable to the 83%. The 83%, they want protected facilities. So they're not looking at either of those and thinking this one's better than that one. They just want to be completely separated from general traffic.
Yeah. Oh, there are lots of questions. Why does the AS 1742.9 allow bike symbols in bike lanes in the middle of the side road intersections?
So I would assume that's all about communicating to exiting traffic of those side streets that they are crossing the bicycle lane. So just highlighting that that conflict point is there and highlighting that usually with the green pavements, the green conflict paint, as well as the bicycle symbol. So it's all about just raising the awareness for motorists leaving the side streets.
Okay. And there it's just a few more comments on the requirements of staying in the lane. So I don't think there is a legal requirement for cyclists to use the cycle lanes. And then someone said, yes, there are requirements to use an official bike lane.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. If there is a bike lane there, you have to, the road rules say you have to use that unless it's unsafe to do so. And it's pretty much as vague as that. So I think if you had a good reason not to use the bike lane, you could probably argue your day in court, but yeah, generally the guidance is you have to use the bike lane.
Sure. But this is just from a little bit back, but I think it's worthwhile bringing up. What's the legality regarding other users in bike lanes? Because there used to be lots of issues with rollerbladers and in your example, the skateboarder and bike paths. So
yeah, it's interesting, particularly as we're now getting into higher powered like e-bikes and other mobility devices, e-scooters and things like that. Are they meant to use the bicycle lanes, or are they meant to use the footpaths? Or I think there's a whole realm of knowledge to tap into there. Generally, as far as I'm aware, skateboards need to be on the footpath, so I don't think they should be in the bike lanes. E-bikes, I think they are far too powerful to be travelling on footpaths and should be using bike lanes, but I'm not sure there's actually any stipulated guidance or road rules that states that they need to be doing that just at this stage. I could be wrong about that though. Yeah, so yeah, your skateboards and your scooters, they should be up on the footpath, not in your bike lanes. I might hop back into the slides if that's okay, because I'm just noting down the time. But if we're talking about mixing the traffic, so getting your bikes, sharing the traffic lane with general traffic, is a really useful little graphic here that kind of stipulates when that may be appropriate. And it's just saying that where the speeds are less than 40 kilometers per hour, lane sharing may be appropriate. If it's between 40 and 60 kilometers per hour, then the relocation of parking or separated bicycle lanes. And you'll note this one, greater than 60 kilometers per hour off-road bicycle paths. That's always not the case. I've certainly ridden on higher speed environments where there have not been an off-road bicycle path. However, this is a really idealistic way of looking at things. And if we are trying to get best practice, this is what we should be looking at as our fundamental. Should be our basis. So this should be our starting point, referring back to this. So we've got these things called sharrows, for those that are not familiar. And what it is actually stating is this is obviously the bike symbol with the arrows there, the chevron arrows. And it's stating that bicycles, cyclists, you now need to take control and you're in the traffic lane now. So it's basically, you no longer got your own bicycle facility, go ahead and ride in the traffic lane. So that's what that's saying. And it's used very, very commonly where bicycle lanes just drop off, say at a roundabout or something like that. And it's just stating that, yeah, you no longer have your separate facility. Now it's just a free for all, just go for it. And if the speeds are low enough and there's enough local area traffic management treatments in place, it can be a very reasonable solution. So think like local streets and riding around residential areas, typically you may not need to provide something like a protected bicycle lane. This can be facilitated through the use of sharrows and other local area traffic management. So just keeping speeds low. So here's an example. And if you wanted to follow the source there, I've included that in the bottom of the link there. So if you wanted to have a look. Interestingly, this exact example has a speed limit of 30. There's few examples where you can find that throughout Australia, really. So it's actually quite a good environment to be cycling through. And also you've kind of seen the distance there. There's some speed humps there just to reinforce that this is a 30-kilometre speed zone, and trying to bring those operating speeds down. Another example I've got here is once again in the 30 zone. This is actually in a rural town. So this is not, in a central hub, but you've got the sharrows there on the ground, so on the pavement, and cyclists are basically using the traffic lane as a general motor vehicle would. And you've got the reminder there, that's big old 30. So we're really promoting these lower speeds where you are sharing the lane. Another thing that is useful in this space, as I mentioned, is providing the local area traffic management. So things that are really common there, providing these one-way slow points or raised kind of areas here. I like this one in particular because you've actually got the area for cyclists to be offset from that slow facility, and they can just cycle straight on through without having to worry about slowing down and obeying the speed hump. So they get the kind of the benefit of having a sweet connected journey, whereas motor vehicles, they're being reinforced that you need to slow down here because there's going to be cyclists in this space. So this is actually in Adelaide. And I included a little link there to an ABC news story because, just interestingly, there was an elderly woman who caused significant graffiti damage to these road signs because apparently she was quite unimpressed by having to slow down at these points. So have a little read through that if you're interested. Other types of local area traffic management is providing these kind of road closures. So either closing the entirety of the road through traffic movements or doing these kind of half road closures. A little bit difficult to see from this snip, but I will just raise it to like an aerial photograph here. So this might make a little bit more sense. If a vehicle is traveling through this section, they have to do this little really circuitous way using that orangey arrow that I've drawn there. And it basically, it's really, it hinders the amount of permeability through this local network. So it's basically encouraging only residents should be using these local streets, and anyone else use the major arterials instead, because it's not meant for this function. And the cyclists, however, get this sweet cycle straight through. So they don't need to worry about that, that little meandering path instead. The disbenefit with this particular design is you've just introduced two conflict points. So if this was just a straight through arrangement, then you don't really have this, but now you've got general traffic crossing over the cycle path twice just to continue their through movement. So I've got a better example of how this could be facilitated, which is this one here. Once again, not the easiest to see on the snip, but if I just jump up to the aerial bird's eye view, cyclists can travel straight through here, no problem. And motor vehicles, this is a full road closure. So they have to turn around on themselves and go and find an arterial road to complete that movement, because this road is just not set up for that type of movement. So they just blocked it off to through vehicles, and they said, nah, if you're cyclists, so you can go through there, we want you, but motor vehicles, we don't want you. So this is a much better example. And what that does is it just recreates this network. Instead of being, motor centric, it's basically only providing for the residents along this street, and instead of, enabling rat running and things like that. So it's quite a good example. That's the end of today's session. We got through lots of content, so thanks for bearing with me. I've got a few other things just to share with regarding what is required for out of session work, and what we'll talk about the next session. But before I jump into that, I'll finish with some questions. I've got I've got this fellow here as well, our penny farthing friend who rides close to our office actually, and he's got his own business there, and he's making a killing. He's doing really well for himself. He builds these bespoke penny farthings and rides them up and down the streets to show off his wares. But anyway, I digress. Sorry, Emma, any questions?
Oh, yeah, some comments on Sharrows, and also Mary's made some comments about other things that are used in bike lanes, which I will go back to after these questions. The Sharrows can also be used to indicate direction of the cycle route.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep, it can communicate exactly where cyclists should be travelling and which direction to kind of take. Good point.
Do Sharrows have any legal standing in Tassie? This is from Luke. So that might be something to open up to the group.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to double check the road rules, whether it's just considered a pavement marking and that's about it. It's purely for raising awareness, or whether there is actually some type of legal.
Mary's just said, I think Sharrows are just just hang on, have I missed? I think Sharrows are just an advisory treatment.
Yeah. Okay.
We have Sharrows in Launceston with a DSGOK. Sorry if I don't know all the language. Department of State Growth Fair. Oh, right. Sorry.
So they've got the tick from the big boss. That's good. Okay.
And then we've just got one more comment, sorry, and that this concept increases possible conflict points.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I tried to show in the little markup there. But yeah, you're basically increasing conflict points that otherwise wouldn't have needed to happen.
And I'll just quickly run through this comment as well about e-scooters and things like that. E-scooters and other personal mobility devices such as e-skateboards and hoverboards will soon be allowed to be used by commercial hire and ride operators and provide users on footpaths, shared paths and local roads. Under the current regulatory framework, e-scooters with a maximum power output of more than 200 watts are classified as motor vehicles and are not permitted on any public street, road, footpath, shared path or open space. This means that most e-scooters now on the market cannot legally be used for transport. The Tasmanian government has identified amendments to the regulations required to allow these modern e-scooters to be used in certain speeds on most local roads, footpaths, shared paths and bicycle paths, and will work with stakeholders, including local government, on their formalisation and adoption. So that's interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. We've got some experts in that space there, so that's interesting to know. I like the idea of the hoverboards as well. I didn't realise we were even in that space yet. I'm behind the times. I might try and share my screen now to show no, this is going to, it's working. Is that shared correctly, Emma? You can see Moodle?
Yes, it is, Max. It looks great.
Sensational. Okay, so for module number 2, we have another example of the 360-degree video, which if everyone can watch before our next session on Tuesday, that'd be excellent. We also have the module 2 assignment. So I'm just going to click on this one here, and it says that I'm logged out. And there's 2 kind of documents within this assignment, one of which is a Word document, and this is what you'll be required to fill in. The other 2 is an actual design. So you'll need to download that one, and you can either print it out or just refer to it as you like. And I'll share my screen again to hopefully show you how that actually looks. So if I've got the Word document open now, hopefully everyone can see that.
Looks great.
Awesome. Sorry, I get a bit nervous about these things. So there's a couple steps here that we've just tried to spell out just to make it as clear as possible. So download and review the module 2 design review file. So that is the PDF that was also in that Moodle folder that I showed before. And that is actually a design for York Street in Launceston. It's only proposed and it's concept only, and it's only for this course. So please don't distribute it, and please don't chat about it to your friends or any members of parliament, because I don't want to get in trouble. But yes, it's purely for training purposes only. So yeah, don't read too much into it. But it's York Street, Launceston, so you can have a flick through the design. And what we're asking for all the participants to do is review the existing conditions of the site using Google Street View. So you can just click on the link and that will take you to what that looks like. And then fill out the table provided below. So there's just 3 questions here we'd like participants to answer. You could jot down all your responses just in the table and save this, and then you can upload it all to Moodle, and then we can review your responses. So the first question, how does the existing environment cater for cyclists? So what is exactly in place to improve cycling safety at the moment? How would a cyclist travel along York Street? How does the design cater for cyclists? So what's the proposed design doing for cycling safety? And the final question is, and this is where you can use a lot of the stuff that we've discussed today, a lot of the resources that we've also mentioned. What treatments or changes in the design could you recommend to improve the safety for cyclists? I'm sure you might be able to think of a dozen or more, but let's just bring it down to 3 that you could recommend, and feel free to just do that as dot points, or you can mark up the PDF if you really want and put little snips of what you think could be done instead. That's also fine, whatever works for you. So that's the assignment. We have allowed the assignment to be completed until the start of the next session. So I realize that's not quite a lot of time, but the reason being is we do want to actually have a chat about the assignment during module 3. So if you can complete that before Tuesday 10 a.m, which is our next session, that would be fantastic. So we can start to review those answers and see what everyone thinks about existing conditions and what's being proposed. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to mention there, Emma.
No, I don't think so. It's pretty simple to upload. You just, once you've saved your document, you just will select upload your submission, and you just need to drag the documents in to the file bed and then hit save changes. That's about it.
And can participants look at other participants' answers, or is it set up to be private?
Not at the moment, but we can certainly share them once you've looked at them all, Max. I can pop them in the resources, the shared resources, if you like.
We might keep it private for this stage, so
okay,
we don't have to be
no problem.
too nervous. I just wanted to clarify that for participants. It will be your own work and only identified by Ken, Emma and myself at this stage. So yes, thanks everyone for joining today, and hopefully you've got some good technical information about on-road cycling facilities and just how important and useful the protected facilities are, and how that really is the gold standard if you want to be providing for cyclists of all ages. And that's really what we need to be targeting for, because we're too easy to get sucked into. It's a lot easier just to not worry about shifting parking and not worried about affecting community sentiment or local residents. But if you want to be providing the best cycling safety out there, either get them off the road completely or protected bicycle lanes is the way to go.
Okay, thanks, Max. I've also just got a couple of comments about Moodle. If you haven't received an email, it would have gone out to you last Tuesday, so a week before we commenced this program. So check your junk folders and spam folders and things like that. But otherwise, I'll resend. A couple of people have got in touch even through the chat, so I'll resend your login details as well today, just to make sure. And then everything's there. So the 360s videos are there. All of Max's PowerPoints will be there, and in an hour or so, once I get the download from Zoom, today's recording will be there as well. So and your assignments will be there as well. So if you're having any trouble, certainly reach out. I'm more than happy to talk you through everything as well.
Any final comments there, Ken?
No, there's a hand up there. I don't know if that was an accidental one or somebody wants to speak.
Oh, Emma's hand was up for a second. But...
That was just me. I was just checking the hand. No.
I've clicked allow to speak if they want to. Anyway,
You
but
have
I think
to
we're out
unmute yourself anyway. Yeah, we are out of time.
of time.
Feel free to send an email though if you do want to confirm anything. But yes, thanks everyone for your time and have a lovely weekend and happy cycling.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Cheers,
See
guys.
you.